On July 3, 2018, the quiet city of Chester, England, became the center of one of the most shocking scandals in British medical history. A nurse from the Countess of Chester Hospital was arrested on suspicion of murdering 7 newborn babies and attempting to kill 15 others. The accusations were almost too horrific to comprehend, but what was found in her home would chill investigators to their core. Written in her own handwriting were the words, "I am evil. I did this, and I don't know if I finished with them. Maybe. Yes, maybe all of this is my fault. But why was this nurse doubting herself? Was Lucy Letby truly guilty of these heinous crimes? Or was she a scapegoat in a failing system?" Lucy Letby was born on January 4, 1990, in the city of Hereford in England's West Midlands region. She was the only child of John and Susan Letby, who worked as a financial manager and accounting assistant, respectively. From a young age, Lucy had a singular dream to work with children in hospitals. This dream was deeply personal. Her mother had experienced a difficult childbirth when Lucy was born, and Lucy wanted to be like the nurses who had saved her mother's life. It was a noble aspiration rooted in gratitude and a desire to help others. After graduating from high school and leaving sixth form college, Lucy enrolled at the University of Chester. Her family celebrated this achievement as enormous as she was the first in her family to pursue a university education. For 3 years, she studied nursing and completed several clinical placements, most of which took place in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. But despite all her energy and dedication, something wasn't quite right. In 2011, Lucy failed her final year practicals. Nicola Lightfoot, her evaluator, reported that Lucy lacked clinical knowledge about medications. She needed more experience in detecting nonverbal signs of anxiety and distress in the parents of her patients. Lightfoot even referred to Lucy as a cold person. Lucy requested a new evaluator and eventually passed her remedial exams. In September of that same year, she obtained her bachelor's degree in nursing sciences with a specialty in pediatric attention. In December, she completed a practical course at Liverpool Women's Hospital. Finally, she had all the necessary experience to begin working, and the authorities seemed to notice. On January 2, 2012, Lucy secured a position as a nurse in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. In a 2013 staff profile, Lucy described herself as responsible for caring for a wide range of babies who required various levels of support. She said she enjoyed seeing their progress and supporting their families. During this time, she also participated in a new campaign to raise funds for a new neonatal unit at the hospital. Everything seemed to be going well until July 2013. Lucy and a more senior nurse adjusted the morphine infusion rate for a newborn to a dose 10 times higher than prescribed. The error was detected quickly, and the baby suffered no negative consequences. But the deputy director of the ward suspended Lucy. Although she was upset by the decision, she was forced to undergo additional training to return to her position. But after complaining about the deputy director of the ward, who had been present during the incident, Lucy was reinstated just 1 week later. In March 2014, Lucy completed a specialization course in neonatal care. In early 2015, she did more practice at Liverpool Women's Hospital and specialized in working with babies in intensive care. It was then that strange events began to occur. In June 2015, 3 babies died at the Countess of Chester Hospital where Lucy worked. In all 3 cases, there was only one common denominator. Lucy had been the nurse attending them. However, when the unit's doctors reviewed the deaths to look for a possible pattern, they didn't suspect her. At the time, hospital staff thought Lucy was very good in moments of crisis. The head of the pediatrics department, Dr. Ravi Gairam, said everyone was grateful that Lucy had been present when the babies became critically ill. But soon, 4 more newborns' deaths were recorded. The unit typically registered only 2 or 3 deaths per year. All alarms went off. The hospital's medical staff began to investigate and started to suspect Lucy. However, they had no evidence to incriminate her. They only found it disturbing that the young nurse seemed to enjoy the adrenaline of her work. She had told colleagues that being in an area other than intensive care would be boring. Eventually, Arian Powell, the unit manager, and Stephen Bry conducted an unofficial review and reported what had occurred to the NHS Foundation Trust Committee responsible for addressing serious incidents. After the review, the committee classified the deaths as medication errors. Bree warned that Lucy had been on shift during all the cases, but it was considered a mere coincidence. Besides, she often worked extra shifts to cover staff shortages. She was too loyal to the institution to simply dismiss her based on mere suspicion. In February 2016, the Care Quality Commission visited the hospital. Employees reported that it was difficult to raise concerns with managers, but they didn't mention that the deaths were increasing. The Care Quality Commission's report identified problems with staff shortages and skill mix within the unit, but it praised the generally positive attitude. Despite the growing death toll, no formal investigation was launched. Between April 2015 and June 2016, 17 babies either died or suffered sudden, unexpected collapses in the neonatal unit. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. In June 2016, several pediatricians, including Dr. Jairam, formally reported their concerns about Lucy Letby to hospital executives. They compiled data showing that Lucy had been present during a statistically significant number of the incidents. But instead of immediately removing Lucy from patient care, the hospital's response was bureaucratic and slow. She was moved to administrative duties, but the hospital's executive team resisted calling in the police. Why? Some have suggested it was to protect the hospital's reputation. Others believed the executives simply couldn't fathom that one of their nurses could be a serial killer. The doctors were increasingly frustrated. They felt their concerns were being dismissed. The hospital even ordered them to apologize to Lucy for raising suspicions about her. Let that sink in. Doctors who were trying to protect vulnerable babies were ordered to apologize to the person they suspected of harming them. It wasn't until May 2017 that Lucy Letby was finally removed from clinical duties entirely, and it took until July 2018, more than 3 years after the first suspicious deaths, for the police to arrest her. When investigators searched Lucy's home, they found disturbing evidence. Handwritten notes where she confessed, "I'm evil. I did this." Medical records that she had no reason to possess. Searches on social media for the parents of babies who had died. But they also found something else. Evidence of a young woman who seemed deeply confused and conflicted. Some notes read like confessions. Others protested her innocence. "I haven't done anything wrong." And they have no evidence. The prosecution would later argue that Lucy used various methods to harm the babies in her care. They claimed she injected air into their bloodstreams, causing fatal embolisms. They said she overfed some babies with milk, causing them to vomit and choke. They alleged she administered insulin to poison others. In some cases, they claimed she simply assaulted the babies, causing them physical trauma. Lucy Letby's trial began in October 2022 at Manchester Crown Court. It would become one of the longest murder trials in British history, lasting 10 months. The prosecution's case relied heavily on statistical analysis and expert testimony. Their key expert was Dr. Dway Evans, a retired pediatrician who testified that the patterns of collapse and death could only be explained by deliberate harm. Dr. Evans introduced the theory of air embolism, claiming that Lucy had injected air into the baby's bloodstreams through their feeding tubes or intravenous lines. He pointed to unusual skin discolorations found on some babies as evidence of this. The prosecution also presented insulin poisoning cases. 2 babies had abnormally high insulin levels that could only be explained by deliberate injection, they argued. But perhaps the most damning evidence was statistical. A chart showed Lucy Letby's presence at every single suspicious incident. The odds of this being coincidence, the prosecution argued, were astronomical. The defense, led by Benjamin Myers, fought back. He argued that the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital was understaffed, underfunded, and poorly managed. The babies who died were premature and fragile. Their deaths, while tragic, were not necessarily the result of foul play. Myers pointed out that the word embolism didn't appear in Lucy's internet search history. He noted that none of the prosecution's medical experts had sufficient clinical experience or knowledge. He argued that their descriptions were inconsistent, but nothing was enough to help Lucy. On August 18, 2023, Andrea Sutcliffe, Chief Executive and Registrar of the Nursing and Midwifery Council, suspended Lucy's license to practice, ensuring that even if she were acquitted, she would never work in a hospital again. 3 days later, on August 21, 2023, the Manchester Crown Court found Lucy Letby guilty of murdering 7 newborns and attempting to murder 6 others. This made her the most prolific child killer in modern United Kingdom history, and these were only the proven cases. Many suspect there were more. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, becoming only the 4th woman in British legal history to receive such a sentence. The judge stated that Lucy had committed a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable children. He declared there was a deep malevolence bordering on sadism. He also indicated that the defendant had shown no remorse during the judicial process. Lucy Letby refused to accept her guilt. In January of 2024, she requested permission to appeal her convictions, but a judge denied it. Undeterred, Lucy renewed her request, and in April of that year, her lawyers presented 4 grounds for appeal. First, they questioned the inclusion of Dr. Dwayne Evans' testimony, arguing it should have been rejected due to his dogmatic and biased behavior. Second, they claimed the medical evidence that let injected air into babies' bloodstreams was very weak. Third, they argued the judge erred in instructing the jury they could convict, even if they weren't sure of the precise method used in each case. Fourth, they claimed the judge failed to investigate the impartiality of one of the jurors. None of this worked. In May, 3 judges rejected the appeal. A written statement concluded that the trial had been deliberate, fair, exhaustive, and correct, and that none of the 4 legal objections presented by the defense were debatable. On July 2, 2024, 2 years after the first trial, Letby was also found guilty of another attempted murder. A 2-hour-old baby born prematurely had her breathing tube dislodged while in the neonatal unit. The prosecution determined that Lucy had manipulated the tube and deliberately failed to replace it properly. For this charge, Lucy was sentenced to another life term. She appealed again. The court rejected it again. Parallel to Lucy's legal battles, the British government ordered an independent investigation named the Thirlwall Inquiry, directed by Lady Justice Thirlwall, a former judge of the British Court of Appeal. The inquiry would focus on the circumstances behind the murders and attempted murders at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Beyond establishing the facts, it aimed to expose the possible permissive culture within the hospital. The inquiry would determine whether Lucy Letby should have been suspended from her position earlier and whether the police should have been informed sooner. But above all, the investigation would focus on the attitude of the hospital's board of directors and doctors, as well as the responses given by hospital officials when the first concerns about Letby arose. The inquiry also analyzed the functioning of Britain's National Health Service and the effectiveness of its oversight structures. In November 2024, as part of the Thirlwall Inquiry, WhatsApp conversations between the nurse and her friend and former colleague Hayley Griffiths were made public. The chats dated from March 2017, when the nurse had already been removed from work due to concerns about her conduct in the neonatal unit. In those chats, Lucy commented that she could offer advice on how to get away with murder, referencing the television series How to Get Away with Murder. Griffiths responded sarcastically, mentioning she needed someone to practice with to see if she could get away with it. Lucy retorted, saying she could get 2 people to practice with and that they could even cover for her. Disturbing, certainly, but was it evidence of guilt or just dark humor from a stressed healthcare worker? A panel of 14 independent experts, world references in the field of neonatology, led by Dr. Michael Hall, a Canadian scientist and professor at the University of Toronto, revealed something that completely altered the course of the case. They expressed to the media that Letby had been the victim of one of the most heinous miscarriages of justice in British history. Each case, both the 7 deaths and the 7 attempted murders, were reviewed independently by 2 experts who submitted their reports. If their opinions differed, a 3rd panel member would step in and they would reach a consensus. According to the experts, the 15 life sentences were based on circumstantial evidence, statistical probabilities, and details of Letby's personal life rather than material evidence. Paul and his team concluded it had been natural complications or poor quality care with professionals who in some cases didn't know what they were doing and facilities in deplorable conditions. Furthermore, Hall and his team raised new doubts about the expert witness Evans, who had argued that Letby injected air into babies' bloodstreams, causing fatal embolisms. Hall affirmed that this theory lacked scientific foundation and that the skin discolorations described at trial were not consistent with a gas embolism. The panel also questioned other key aspects of the prosecution, such as the overfeeding of a baby, which they attributed to a viral infection treated with antibiotics. In all 17 babies involved in the case, there had been delays in treatment, misdiagnosis, and lack of properly trained staff. For example, the panel concluded that child 1, a 1-day-old twin that Letby was convicted of murdering, actually died due to thrombosis caused by a 4-hour delay in administering an infusion. Another baby, a 10-week-old girl, died from complications related to respiratory distress syndrome and chronic lung disease, not from a deliberate act. The panel also questioned the supposed insulin poisonings that formed part of the prosecution. During the trial, it was argued that abnormal insulin levels in 2 babies could only be explained by deliberate injection. The experts pointed out that this claim was never properly challenged by Letby's original defense, leaving the jury with no other explanation than her guilt. But here's what the panel discovered. There are numerous medical conditions and laboratory errors that can produce misleading insulin readings. The testing methods used were not definitive, and critically, there was no evidence that Lucy had access to insulin or syringes at the times in question. In synthesis, according to this investigation, the majority of babies had been in the wrong hospital. They had received late diagnosis and inadequate or absent treatment. This had far more to do with the hospital than with Letby. The Countess of Chester Hospital's neonatal unit was chronically understaffed. Nurses and doctors were overworked. Equipment was outdated. The facility was handling babies that required a higher level of care than it was equipped to provide. When doctors raised concerns, they were ignored or silenced. When they insisted, they were told to apologize. The hospital's priority seemed to be protecting its reputation rather than protecting its patients. Lucy's parents had sent a letter to the hospital defending their daughter and suggesting that certain medical consultants had personal grudges against her. Instead of investigating these claims properly, hospital executives accepted the complaint and ordered the doctors involved to apologize to Letby. There was definitely a culture within the hospital that enabled her behavior and was unwilling to dig deeper into what had happened. So what do we believe? Was Lucy Letby a cold-blooded killer who preyed on the most vulnerable? Or was she a convenient scapegoat for a failing healthcare system? The evidence against her includes suspicious statistical correlations concerning notes found in her home and expert testimony about methods of harm. But the evidence also includes a deeply flawed investigation, questionable medical expertise, and a hospital system that was demonstrably failing its patients. Consider this. If the hospital had been properly staffed, if the equipment had been adequate, if the doctor's concerns had been addressed immediately, would any of these babies have died? We'll never know. What we do know is that vulnerable babies died. Their families deserve answers. They deserve justice. But is justice served by imprisoning one nurse for life when an entire system failed? The families of the victims remain divided. Some believe Lucy Letby is exactly where she belongs. Others have begun to question whether the right person is behind bars. Medical experts around the world continue to debate the evidence. Some support the conviction, others call it one of the worst miscarriages of justice in modern history. The thorough Wall inquiry continues its work, examining not just what happened, but why it was allowed to happen. Its findings could reshape how Britain's National Health Service operates and how medical professionals report concerns. Lucy Letby sits in prison maintaining her innocence. She has exhausted her appeals. Unless new evidence emerges or public pressure forces another review, she will spend the rest of her life behind bars. But here's what keeps many people awake at night. What if we got it wrong? What if an overworked, stressed nurse became the target of a system looking for someone to blame? What if the real killer was not a person, but a failing healthcare system that prioritized budgets over babies? Or what if Lucy Letby is exactly what the prosecution claimed? A predator in scrubs whose crimes were enabled by a system too slow and too protective of its reputation to stop her. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the evidence. But in this case, even the evidence itself is in dispute. What do you think? Was Lucy Letby a serial killer or the victim of one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in British history? The debate continues, and the implications reach far beyond one hospital, one nurse, one trial. They reach into every medical facility where vulnerable patients depend on overworked staff in underfunded systems. They reach into every courtroom where statistical evidence might outweigh material proof. They reach into our fundamental beliefs about guilt, innocence, and the pursuit of justice. The case of Lucy Letby is far from over, and the questions it raises will echo for generations to come. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you can be the first to hear about such real-life stories.